Ready when you are.
All right. You good, Randy?
Yep.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the May 21st, 2020 Watertown Plan Commission meeting. Can I get a roll call?
Hanson. Dolly.
Here.
Stein. Oletsky.
Present.
Dargits Johnson.
Here.
And Kays.
Here.
Ford.
Here.
And Jeff, do you want in on this meeting?
Well, I'm here, but I can't be a part of the vote except for during when the public hearing is open.
Okay. So,
And Liam is absent.
yeah, Liam is absent, so we have a quorum.
Okay. Item 3 on the agenda is invitation for public comment participants submittal. If you'd like to speak on something that's not on the agenda, there will be a time for that towards the end. Item 4 is approval of the agenda. Need a motion?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion.
I'll second that.
Ford seconds. We'll take a vote on the agenda.
Hanson.
Yes.
Dolly.
Yes?
Stein.
Yes.
Oletsky.
Yes.
Dargits Johnson.
Yes.
Kays.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Moving on to item 5 on the regular agenda. First item is A, Resolution 2020-24. Brandy?
Yep, so this is commission consideration of resolution number 2020-24, amending the zoning map of the city of Watertown for a portion of Lot A, Compesca Dunes second subdivision from R1 single-family residential district to R3 multifamily residential district. So here you'll see, we previously approved the preliminary plan for this area at the April 23rd meeting, if you guys recall. And so now they're working on their first phase, and this is part of that where they're rezoning it to the approved zoning of R3 that we approved for the prelim plan. And so this is the farthest southeast corner for Lot A of Compesca Dunes. I'll pull up the GIS here to give you an idea with the layout of the homes there. So it's in this southeast corner that they will be proposing that to be R3.
Thank you, Brandy. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing if anybody's here to speak on behalf or against. I had a question for you, Brandy, in relation to the preliminary plan. Page 9 of the agenda packet. We had some discussion of those northeast R1 lots there. Does this match the adjustments that were made to the previous preliminary plan?
No, actually. Oh, and I don't have the end drive up. So what is consistent, now this isn't, we are changing these lots to R2, and the prelim plan does reflect that after it was approved. This was an old exhibit. This was basically to show Block 3 that it was approved as R3.
But the R3, the block in question that we're looking at today was R3 at the time that we had the previous discussion on the preliminary plan and was approved as R3.
Yep.
Any other questions from the board?
Well, that's the petition exhibit that you're holding up there. It's the same property, but so it's this area right here, Mark. Lot 1 of Block 3.
But all of the lots around it are also going to be R3 also, right? It's going to be R3 from golf course all the way up to 11th?
Yeah, eventually, but right now they're leaving those as R1 for now, and they're just working on this first phase. Because if you see up here in the phasing map, they are just, that'll come for phase 2. But right now it's just that area with the proposed storage units, which they'd have to come back to the Board of Adjustment for a conditional use for that use.
That's what they want to put there, is storage units?
Mm-hmm. But if you look at, even without looking at the use as the zoning itself, It is on the corner of two collector streets where it does create a nice transition zone and buffer between the R1 lots. If it would be an apartment complex or storage units, whatever it could be in the R3, that it does provide the transitional zoning that we would like.
And that's consistent with what was presented in the previous preliminary plan as well. It noted at that point in time too that these were earmarked, I guess, for storage units.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Well, one of the neighbors had some concerns the last time this was in front of the board here. Were those taken care of then?
Well, I think that those were with the drainage and the pond. And so we are still working with the developer and then the owners of the existing pond on Lot 1, and those will be resolved with this development. Because they're actually going to be using some fill from that pond to raise that area that they're rezoning right now.
Will they have to come back to get a conditional use to be able to build the storage unit so that if the homeowners in that area want to talk about it, they can?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
The difficult thing is that so we send the certified mailings out to adjacent property owners within 250 feet of the area, which then you actually don't touch the neighbors. And so that's the difficult thing of who's getting the notice. So hopefully just by word of mouth that if they do have concerns that they're paying attention to the agendas and whatnot. It is unfortunate. But you have to draw the line somewhere of who to include.
For conditional use, more of the neighbors will get notified because he'll still own the entire area there, and so by legal description, they will get notified, I believe. So I guess I'm planning at this moment that some of those neighbors up there will get notified as being adjacent to the property. So that should take care of them, I think.
Is it your understanding that they're going to put the storage units up first before they do any of the, housing? And that's going to be the first thing that goes up is the storage units?
Yeah, this is the first phase, is this area where they would do the storage units.
Well, then clearly any lots that they sell in that area, they're going to know there's a, storage unit there.
Yeah, but what about the ones that are already there? They thought that
well,
was going to
they're-
be R1.
Well, I think that was the discussion here, that those lots that are abutting the existing homes continue to be R1 lots, so that there's the house that's next to them that's currently bare ground is going to develop as an R1. And then with this preliminary plan now, anybody that buys a lot going forward is fully aware of what the preliminary plan as of today shows, including the storage lots, the R3, the R2 development. So it protects the existing landowners with the immediately adjacent property, as well as provides a roadmap for anybody buying those lots going forward.
Will screening be a requirement around the storage sheds when the next phase is brought in? I mean, I know now it won't probably be, but when the next row of houses, or the R2 come in, or R3?
So that, when they come in for the conditional use, that can be a condition that you guys would put on them at that time. Otherwise, if the housing would come, I mean, it's all R3, so it could be single-family housing, it could be anything that's allowed by conditional use or just as a permitted use in the R3 zone. So it could be addressed when we do this first conditional use or at a later time too. But there wouldn't necessarily be anything that we would be able to retroactively go back and say, now that there's a house there, you have to screen.
Right, so, yeah, but my question is, when you put storage units up, do you typically have to put screening up to residential, even if it is R3?
If you're abutting residential, you have to screen your driveway, or I mean your parking.
Parking.
Yeah. But not the entire property. And that would be more so to dissipate any light pollution that headlights would create in the dark and whatnot. So it's not disrupting to adjacent land or homeowners.
I remember we have had the ones along First Avenue North and stuff, the old railroad tracks. We, years ago, when they were building those, we said they had to put up screening, and that never happened.
Yeah, and so that could be something with, I mean, you guys see the preliminary plan, you know what the neighborhood might end up being. And you'll hear the neighbors' concerns too, where that might be something you want to look at when you're granting the conditional use. But as far as the rezone though, not at this time. But good things to be thinking about for the future.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir?
this is Todd. To me, the discussion of whether or not these are storage units or they're multiple family houses is really irrelevant at the time of the rezoning. It's just whether or not it's this appropriate place for anything that's in that R3 zoning district. And if we at the preliminary plan generally agree that this is a good place for R3 as a transition zone, I'm supportive of the R3 rezoning to be consistent with our previous decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Case.
I agree 100%. This is a great place for an R3 transitional use.
And just a reminder, we are in the public hearing. Is there anybody else to speak in the public here before I close the public hearing? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. We will need a motion to take action on this resolution.
I'll move to approve resolution 2020-24.
Correct. I have a motion on the table by Mr. Stein to approve.
This is Bonnie, I'll second that.
And we have a second. Any additional discussion before we take a vote? Okay, we'll take a roll call vote.
Hanson,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes?
Stein,
Yes.
Oletsky,
Yes.
Dargit Johnson,
Yes.
Kays,
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Motion is approved. All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda, we've got a Valley View second annexation and zoning. So we'll have two resolutions on this. I think we'll take the public hearing and open it together for both resolutions, and then we can take action on them separately.
Sounds
Randy,
good.
I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. So as Blake said, this is the annexation and zoning for Valley View second edition. I'll pull up the map here in this area. So this, he is petitioning, and actually this exhibit will be more helpful. So the first edition of Valley View was done previously, and the preliminary plan is still effective, and that is effective until, what date is here? Oh, I don't have that. Anyways, it is still effective, I think, until September. So, and then we'll address it at that time. The developer has requested an extension, so we'll look at the plans and make sure if anything needs to be amended or updated. But anyways, as far as this annexation and zoning goes, he is proposing to annex 11.5 acres, and it will include another portion of 2nd Street Northwest. And so against 2nd Street, and I can go to GIS to give you guys a better idea. So he's going to follow what is already there. So R3 will be extended up 2nd Street, and then the next block over will be R2, and then the other blocks will be R1. So it'll be consistent with what the prelim plan showed, and then also what is already has been developed.
Thank you, Brandy. So as I said, I'll open one public hearing on both of these resolutions before taking action. So at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing if anybody's here to speak on behalf or against. Brandy, do you have the preliminary plan for the overall development?
Yep. Oh, no. Because I don't have the N drive. Heath, would you by chance be able to pull that up and share your screen? I can tell you where it is.
Yeah, I'll walk through that here, Brandy, and try to find it.
Okay, thank you.
In planning, and then
And then it's, should be urban planner work file, and then Valley View first edition. And then the prelim plan, and then it has approved after it.
let me find the approved version here, and I'll pull it up.
Sounds good.
That coming through?
Yep.
Thank
So
you,
the
Heath.
Phasing, I assume we'd want to reference the phasing here for the boards. Let me zoom in on that component. So here's the phasing plan on the preliminary plan. It was approved. And as you'll see, looks like they had intended to go another lot further to the north, Brandy, is that right? But they've trimmed that out and they're only including this roadway now?
Yeah.
Are they planning to put in the full finished street there?
Yep. Yep, they'll be platting the entire right-of-way, and it'll have to come forward for platting still, so then we'll have the development agreement with all of the public improvements that will need to
Okay.
be completed.
Brandy, what was the park agreement on that? I mean, we're getting a lot of homes up there and I see no park.
So we have dedicated, the park is along 14th, where we have the bike trail right now. That area is considered the park, and I think that initially the Park and Rec Department was thinking that that might be a starting point for somebody to get on the bike trail, that they would create like a little parking area and gazebo of some sort as a trailhead. But it's just, they'll work through that with their budget and in the future. But the land is the city's, so it could be developed anytime.
Is that whole stretch there, and is any of that dedicated to stormwater retention?
This area, maybe on the prelim plan, on the drainage plan, that existing pond, I know they made some improvements to it, but then a majority of their detention went to the west in that pond. But I think they did make some improvements to that
Okay.
that existing pond.
That area by the railroad tracks, is that what you're talking about, the existing pond?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the pond, the park is adjacent to 14th Avenue, the collector,
Yep.
and it's pretty much a valley. I mean, so there's no, no
Yeah.
place, there's not gonna be a playground set up there.
Well, and I think there would be areas enough where they could grade it. I just think that with having our trail there, and it is set back quite a ways from the collector, that at the time that this was approved by the park board, they thought it was appropriate, where it would be more of a native, natural park.
Yeah, I know there was a lot of discussion at the time. Of course, that's the decision of the park board on what to accept or not to accept during this this type of development, but there was discussion on whether, you know, they wanted a playground type piece of land or that. Yeah, certainly do like to see playgrounds, of course,
But the bike trail is really nice through there, and it goes around the
Yeah.
tree and stuff. It kind of stops right at the railroad track, but I'm assuming that's gonna get completed someday, once they figure out what they're gonna do with the pond.
Well, because the trail, then you have to get down across the railroad tracks, and then you go over to St. Anne's Hill, which that's a really pretty segment there.
it
that
is, yeah.
It's connected nice, and it's in the low area where you can use those areas of inundation for park type development. So that works out nice to have the multiple uses. And eventually, I believe the trail is going to extend north up to River Ridge, but it's been a bit since I've looked at that.
It's
on
not
the
gonna
west
be
side.
just on 10th or 2nd Avenue? That's not gonna be considered the trail, or is it gonna go through there, into River Ridge, through it? Through the
That-
developments?
So right now the bike trail is being extended past the olive, where Heath has his cursor. North on the Olive House, on the Olive Place property.
Oh, yeah,
On
it's
the
gonna
west
go
side.
behind the house, right?
Yep, and
Okay.
then it'll run adjacent to 16th Ave and then get back onto 2nd. But for some reason, I was thinking there was a trail to the west. Can we look at that area and see if?
And the plan does show
Maybe wrong.
there, you know, a potential option for that park where there's, you know, a parking area, and the grading up at the top of the hill could be conducive to some sort of, you know, small playground or picnic shelter or something along those lines. But now that strip of land there, that's the park dedication for the full development, right?
Yep. Yeah, and then, you know, we want to have a park every quarter mile. So where River Ridge, then theirs gets up to the north end of their development, but that's really prime property there. Unfortunately, just from the past, that it wasn't accomplished. It was slated at one time to have the park on the south side of River Ridge, which in hindsight, you know, you could have combined a park potentially between the two quarter sections, but just things that we're aware of now and things that we want to plan for.
But the one in River Ridge is gonna be a nice big playground, ball diamond type park, right?
I think so, for sure, the playground.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think Park and Rec will just assess it and see kind of what the needs are at the time. And
Now, that's been
the budget
dedicated
is.
over to the city too now at this point, isn't it?
not quite. It had to with the next plat, which you
Yep.
guys will be seeing River Ridge 7th edition very soon, like the
Okay.
next 2 meetings.
I know we had discussed it at one point in time, and we had looked at a plan for that next set of development up there.
Yep. And so that's all approved with the prelim plan.
Yep.
We're good with that. Because we went through a couple of renditions, and then now where the park landed and everything around it, it's a nice plan.
Good. Good.
So
Okay. Thank you for pulling that up, Heath. Any additional discussion in the public? I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. We'll need to take action on these resolutions separately, so I'll ask for a motion first on the annexation.
I'm sorry that I didn't bring this up sooner, but when Heath pulled up that plan, just to be clear, I did say that what they were annexing zoning was consistent with the prelim plan, but you'll see that in that first phase, they decided to add the R2 zoning as
Right.
transition between, but the
This
fact
is
that they're.
consistent with the previous approval, though.
Yep. So, but I just wanted to correct myself on misspeaking.
Thank you.
I got a question, just one quick question. That R3 right here, what's the street that it goes from R3 to R1?
Well, so that's the duplex development that Heilman is doing. And so that's a private street. And then these duplexes will enter into there and kind of have a little community feel.
So it'll transition kind of like the North Ridge Village and stuff like that, and what
Yep.
Joy is doing? Okay.
Yep, and so it'll be, it's adjacent or it parallel to Fifth Street Northwest. So we kept that private street is called that too, just so there's not some random name of a street where you're like, where is it? So at least it'll be easy to locate. And it's only a block long, so.
I'd make a motion to approve Resolution 2020-22 with the annexation of tract.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Have a motion on the table? A second by Mr.
Ford,
Stein.
second.
We'll go ahead and take a roll call vote.
Oh, sorry. I was focused on what he was doing. Hanson,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes.
Stein,
Yes.
Aletsky,
Yes.
Dargits Johnson,
Yes.
Kays,
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Resolution passes. Thank you. Moving on to the next resolution, 2020-23 for the zoning designation.
I'll make a motion to approve 2020-23.
A motion by Mr. Hanson,
I'll second that.
Ford.
second by Oletsky.
Poor Diana.
There's a little bit of a delay from the internet, you know. So
It's Bonnie every time. Just
Yep.
stealing Diana's thunder.
we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Hanson,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes.
Stein,
Yes.
Aletsky.
Yes.
Dargits Johnson,
Yes.
Kays,
Yes.
and Ford.
Yes.
Last but not least.
Thank you. Resolution passes. Moving on to item 6 on the agenda is open public comments. Is there anybody to speak on something that wasn't on the agenda? Hearing none, I'll move on to new business, and I believe we do have a topic there.
Yes, and then actually, I have another topic too that I'll bring up after this one that's already on the agenda. So this is about contractor shops and storage yards definition. So we just wanted to bring this to the board's attention to get your thoughts on our current definition and to make sure that it's accomplishing what we want it to and what its intention is, because it could be either expanded or whatnot to allow for other things, because right now it kind of, let me get the definition here for you guys. So it's the use of land or buildings for storage and preparation of materials used by that same individual in conducting business, including but not limited to construction, repair work, fabrication and assembly, and incidental retail sales. Each unit shall have separate water and sewer utilities. So basically, is this, now contractor shops and storage yards are in the I-1 zone as permitted. I believe, and I think they're conditional use in C3. Sorry, I should have. Okay, so they're conditional use in the C1, which is our community commercial downtown, and in the C3 as conditional uses. And then I-1
Chair?
is permitted.
Are you sharing that your screen, Brandy?
Oh, no, sorry. Okay. And then so they are a permitted use in the I-1. So what we've seen happen is they can turn, like, and Heath, you might be able to clarify exactly what we're wanting.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you, Brandy. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, essentially, what we're wanting to find out is what kind of input the board might have on how this definition reads currently today. Contractor shops exist all throughout town. Most of them, of course, are, for the most part, conforming. They're in the appropriate zoning district, have obtained the appropriate conditional uses. But absence of a use permit in this community, we don't know who's coming and going in these contractor shops. So when they're built and when they go through the proper conditional use approvals for the C districts, and or when they're built in the I districts as permitted uses, you know, the intended use at that time may be something that's in compliance with this definition as generally described as you see there on the screen. Now, what could happen, and what does happen is obviously those tenants or owners of those units will change hands over the years, and we may get a use in there that doesn't quite fit the intent of this definition. And, you know, that's not necessarily an issue that we seek out, but there are times we come across these things and have to call that attention to the owner of the facility to make sure that they're in compliance with the definition. So with that being a concern, we just wanted to make sure the board was comfortable with what the intent, what we feel, the staff feels the intent of this definition is, or whether it should be broadened to include a more wide range of uses. And what I mean specifically to that, this definition does reference
Incidental retail sales.
Let's see, preparation of materials used by the same individual in conducting businesses, including but not limited to construction, repair work, fabrication, and assembly, and incidental retail sales. So with this including but not limited to list, we as staff would apply that to presumably mean that, you know, the use should fall generally in that realm of being construction related, repair work related, fabrication related, assembly, and then incidental sales to those types of things, or something closely related to that. I don't think we've ever found one, but an example would be is what if a quilt making store went into a contractor shop? What would we as staff be expected to do with that? What does the board think about that use under this definition? Should we be sending them a notice of any kind of violation of the zoning district uses or not? And what it comes down to is, should we be broadening this definition or writing a new definition that's related to a wider range of uses?
Heath, this is Todd, Mr. Chair. I think the term incidental retail sales is problematic because I'm not exactly sure what that means unless you're tying it to those previous work. And I do agree in the review of this definition that the uses of those storage units that have been converted into contractor shops and yards is primarily for the guy or the girl to show up, do the thing that they're doing there related to that business that might be an off-site aspect. We're not having, you know, restaurants and guitar lessons and those types of things to be done in those types of buildings just because we don't have parking and we don't have some of the other things that would necessarily go along a retail establishment.
Right, because I think
I was asked to just do a little research on some other communities, and it looks like our definition currently is actually already more expansive than other communities as it relates to contractor shops. Sioux Falls and Brookings, for example, I looked at, and they're both have language that says construction and repair work, and that the primary purpose is for tenants to be doing their work off-site. So the word off-site is in those definitions. So I'll just let you know that our current definition is already apparently more expansive than what is normal, quote unquote, for others in this area.
Yeah, and I guess, from my perspective on what we've typically looked at these lots for, or these types of operations, has been, akin to that, where you expect it to be primarily off-site, and they're doing maybe some work there, or storing equipment there, materials there. When I look at that definition that exists today, it does seem really quite broad. I mean, you get into fabrication and assembly, and then you're talking manufacturing, right? Retail sales, of course, is quite different than what we would expect to see from a typical contractor shop. Almost seems like we need to tighten it up a little bit.
Mr. Chair, if I can give you just a little bit of a history of where that definition came in, back when we started building in the Arenzi addition back behind the mall, and that's where our contractor shops kind of started. The idea was to give contractors, whether it was construction, house contractors, or maybe a plumber, the area in which to store their materials and equipment, an office space, and then an incidental retail area, such as having some sinks, that might be available through that plumber, or maybe shingles, or an upholster, or not necessarily that, but would they have the shingles on those demonstration boards and things like that, so that not very many customers were coming in, but they could sell out of there. But it was basically for storage of equipment and doing a little bit of manufacturing of putting together maybe some cabinets or things off-site to bring it to the other workplace.
Because I think the main thing that we want to avoid is encouraging customers in these areas. We want it to be, it's light industrial, so that's because we want them in an area, that's where the manufacturing or whatnot takes place, or the loud noises, heavy equipment, and then that the actual product would be sold in a zone where a retail establishment was allowed.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Just for a little bit more context here, it sounds like in the discussion that maybe this definition for contractor shops is appropriate, if not maybe a little looser than we would like it to be for the intent of the term contractor shop. But to further describe the discussion we had internally as staff, and I pose this information just to help brainstorm some ideas here if any are needed. But the concern of the question is if facilities like this shouldn't be allowed to be used for more of a small business type of application, not necessarily full-blown retail, but, like an incubator type business program where you got startup companies trying to find a cheap place to rent and to get their business up and off the ground and running. And so I personally would suggest that, we make the contractor shop definition mean what we intend a contractor shop to be. And then maybe if we feel that's a necessity for the community to look at this other more expanded type of use in a similar type of facility and maybe create a definition for that if the board feels that that's something that we should look at doing and somehow trying to quantify. Now, when you consider that, the first thing that comes to mind as staff also comes back to the rest of the zoning ordinance that we have to work with, because there's a lot of areas in town where those types of incubator type new business development types of businesses can go into. Several of the zoning districts and their uses would accommodate several different kinds of things like that to happen. It's just whether we need to expand that and whether we should make that available to facilities like a contractor shop. That's kind of the background, a little bit more background on the discussion that was had, and I wanted to just share those thoughts with you as well to get some input on that, or your thoughts on that.
Are there any contractors that you'll have to give notice to and just say, if we do change this, that you're going to have to change the way you're doing business?
No, I don't think this would affect any contractor shop. This would just tighten up the language so that if we would come across something that that we even either got a complaint about or just came across, that we could give them notice that, hey, this use isn't allowed in this district, and direct them to, probably more commercial.
As long as someone doesn't have to say, well, I could do this yesterday and now I can't tomorrow. I don't want to,
Right.
So Brandy,
so
my
that wouldn't hurt it.
I guess my question, this again is to kind of clean up some of that, warehouse fitness type centers, or I know we had that kind of dance gymnastic studio.
Yeah, so in a way, because then we created a separate definition for that that's a conditional use, where if they are using a contractor shop for their gym or whatnot, then they would just show that in the conditional use request, and then it could be examined. And that's kind of, it's just broad of what can really happen in a storage unit. What we don't want to happen is something that's really attracting a bunch of people, like the gymnastics or whatnot. And just making sure that our definition is accomplishing what we want it to. And so maybe is it just getting,
What's confusing to me is that contractor shops and storage are considered the same. Kind of like the case we ran into uptown, where he wanted the water in the storage shed, and we.
This is different than the storage shed definition.
Well,
this is
but
contractor
they've got it
shop
in
and storage.
storage yards, so it's contractor shops and storage yards are in the same. That's where I get. That's where I think there's a lot of gray there, is because we got somebody who's putting up storage, and all of a sudden, like you're saying, they're maybe going to be running something that is more contractor. See what I'm saying? I think that's where the gray area lies, in my opinion, is that crossover there. If we have contractor shop is, does have running water and storage sheds. In my opinion, storage does not have water in it. That to me, that's kind of a big thing.
the storage unit.
Yes.
And so there is a separate definition called storage unit, and I guess with the similar language to storage yards, there can be some confusion there.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know why it's called storage yards. I don't know that terminology should even be there.
Just have a contractor shops and yards.
Yeah, and if I could speak to that, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I think, to me at least, if you're familiar with the industry and working with contractors and the terminology that gets thrown around in the construction world, it's commonly called a storage yard, where a contractor would keep his backhoe and his concrete forms and things of that nature that are related to his construction business. So I think that's why that term got plugged into this definition as a contractor shop and storage yard.
Right.
I think that recommendation that was just made, though, would also make sense to call it a contractor shop and yard. But just generally speaking in the industry, that does make sense the way it is written, and that as far as that lingo goes.
I know, but it would clear it up for idiots like me, that I know that storage is separate than contractor. That's all. I just think that you just take that little word out of there, and it all of a sudden the clouds disappear. You're talking contractor opposed to storage. That's all.
But I may interject, the storage yard is for the allow to store things on the exterior of the building, not the interior, and you don't necessarily have to have a structure to have a storage yard.
That's a good point too, Ken. Thanks.
Maybe they should be two separate definitions.
Could we call it contractor shop and contractor storage yard instead of just storage yard?
I think we're kind of splitting hairs now.
Yeah, we probably are. The other thing, I guess, so I'm, me, and I'm always, we approved, you're worried about that someone would be running a business or retail out of there, light retail. Again, if they're going to go full-fledged, they're going to want to be somewhere where people can find them. And yet, so if that's a concern of ours, something that confuses me is that if we're going to allow, that, we also allow someone to live in this. We just passed that, you know, that someone can live in a contractor shop. So again, it comes back to me as, okay, so why are we splitting hairs about if somebody's having someone come and pick up a few items when we have somebody actually living in an I-1 district? So,
Oh, for the caretaker's residence?
yeah.
And we actually moved that, we tightened that language up, that it was just permitted, and so we had no idea who was living in them, but now it's a conditional use where, and it has to be, you know, somebody that works there or owns it, whatnot, that it's more of it's, you know, they're looking after the property.
Yeah, I would prefer that, you know, we keep things like that separate. So instead of expanding the existing definition here to allow more things, that if we need to have something else, have it as a separate conditional use so that they do have to apply for that specific conditional use and come back for review, right? That said, I don't know that we necessarily want to expand uses into the I-1 district where we have, you know, reserved properties for these contractor type shops and contractor storage yards for uses that would fit more appropriately in another zone within the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when we talk about, like, Heath's reference to, like, a quilting shop, that would be, like, for a startup business, you would look at, you know, a small retail shop in a strip mall or, and like, anywhere, but you would be in the right district then, at least.
So let's just take the idea of a welder. You know, I break something and I need it welded together. Is that what you're considering, something retail that you want to avoid?
No, it would be like, say that you were opening up the garage and setting up shop, like you had a boutique, and then you had people go and shop, you know, where it probably would be more feasible doing that, but that's not what we'd want for a contractor shop, because we want to reserve those areas for the contract-like businesses, where then they're not having issues with parking, or somebody's not getting injured with big equipment around, or, you know, or the other tenants being, or like the person that would own the boutique then to be annoyed because it was always noisy or dusty, or, you know. So it's the whole premise of zoning is then to safeguard each type of use from each other and try to group them. So, like, just wanting to avoid basic, in my eyes, it's trying to avoid the retail establishments happening. And
It wants to do that, and is it possible to say this one and we have it here and
Is it Diana?
say
Yeah.
this is we don't want it?
Diane, you were kind of breaking up there at the beginning.
Power is going off and on out here at the lake. So can you hear me?
A little better.
Okay, never mind. Power.
Nope, didn't catch any of that.
Maybe if Diana, if you want to type it.
I think I heard her say at the end, would it be easier to say what we don't want in it? Is that what you said, Diana?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
I didn't catch it.
Well, the definition, though, it has the grouping of what type of businesses we imagine using a contractor shop.
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty difficult to start listing out everything that you don't want in there, as opposed to just trying to make sure that what uses we do get are conforming to the existing definition.
I mean, too, if we feel the definition is fine for what we're trying to accomplish, there's something in it, you know, that we could rework the definition to make it explicit for contractor-like businesses that would be using this definition. And then try to, because it's broad, where so for storage and preparation of materials used by the same individual and conducting business, and then including but not limited to, this is where it kind of groups them into the construction type businesses. But then the incidental retail sales is a little odd.
So you want the incidental retail sales removed?
That might help. But
Or if you put something about sales, so the welder, I come in, he welded it, I paid him $20 and on my way I went. So if you put something where the retail sales is not the primary source of income, or could you do something like that, or doesn't exceed, I don't know. But if that's what you're looking for, to get the retail sales out, to keep
I mean,
kept
if it's a contractor and they're offering a service and they're billing out for service, I don't see why you need to have a retail nomenclature in there in any case. I mean,
Right.
every contractor is billing for their services, and we don't necessarily need to explicitly describe them as retail transactions.
They're only gonna have like one couple or one or two people at a time. It's not like 20 people show up and they're gonna start bidding for blue jeans, but we wanna have,
Well,
the
and
welder.
the thing about, and we want a place for those businesses to go. And, it depends too on the scope of the business. These types of contractor shops where they're all connected and, once the business expands, then they would probably have their own lot then and need more space for employees and goods and storage altogether. So maybe it is just getting rid of the incidental retail sales. And maybe even using that language that Matt had referenced that other communities use about that the main work is performed off-site.
Yeah, my only concern there, and as we started to talk, is that fabrication and assembly type work. So if it is somebody doing, welding and they're a contract, shop where you're bringing materials to them, they're fabricating something and then, yeah, I mean, that's done on site primarily, but still fits into that general nature of contractor shop.
Right.
What about, this was brought up at, what kind of triggered this discussion. What about food service? So say there's a business that delivers meat door to door or something, and they use it as their storage or assembly, or maybe not meat. I don't know. They deliver some sort of food with a truck, but they use the shop as the place where they package the food. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, this is Todd. I mean, I think the storage unit, the shop where I've got maybe reefers in there, or I'm storing the truck, or those types of things. I think that's one thing. That's probably not a big deal. That's what I would envision. If I'm cooking brats on a Saturday and inviting people there to have brats, I don't think that's probably the intent of the contractor shop.
Right. Well, and with food services, they, the trigger there would be if they were getting a license through the Department of Health and then they had to put in a 3-compartment sink because to have the grease traps and everything, then that would be, at least we could catch that to say, hey, this isn't allowed here. That's a commercial use. But yeah, I mean, Matt's point of what if somebody is making the food there? Well, they should have a license. But then putting it in a truck and then going to a different site and then selling it. So they are preparing it there, which is allowed by the definition.
Well, but I'll point out too, if I could, Mr. Chairman. I wouldn't agree that the current definition allows for the preparation of food in a contractor shop, because food service to me does not fit the definition the way it reads right now today. So if we have somebody peddling, crates of frozen meat through a contractor shop. To me, that's a food service type of industry. Does that fit the intent of the definition to say including but not limited to construction, repair work, fabrication, and assembly? I don't know, I guess.
Yeah.
Knowing what a contractor shop and storage yard's intended use is, to me, that just doesn't feel like the right fit for this definition. So that's the good point right there on whether we need to redefine a use like that rather than trying to force it into this definition, or whether we're fine with as is right now. We don't want that kind of function to carry out in a similar zoning district as a contractor shop. That's kind of the question at hand here.
Yeah.
Is it as simple, and maybe you don't disagree, or don't even agree, but if there's a consensus on no food service of any kind, that could be put in there, just that kind of wording, couldn't it?
But aren't there some refrigerated storage or freezer storage areas where food is stored in an area that's zoned for contractor shops? I'm sure there are.
I think we're talking about some issues that are not necessarily fitting in this definition either way. If you do have food preparation, I think there's even food storage. I mean, you're talking about refrigerated warehousing operations there. It's more akin to a warehousing operation, not a contractor shop in a storage yard. So I don't know. I don't see any issue necessarily with the definition as it exists today. And I think that we can clearly differentiate between some of this other stuff that doesn't fit the intended definition. And if it does become a problem, then you have to address it with the use, right? It's not a use that's zoned for that district.
Right.
I guess I would, go back to staff and say that if something comes before you and you don't think it fits, and you let the person know that it doesn't fit, they have the ability to come back to this board and appeal your decision to say whether you're right or you're wrong. I think most of us trust you guys to make the call on that.
Yep.
Yeah, and go ahead.
No, I'm done.
I was just going to say, we appreciate any input. We're not necessarily asking to change anything, but we definitely wanted to talk through this, get some ideas from the board, and see if there's anything that we need to change. We weren't necessarily looking to change anything, and we're fine leaving it as is, but just wanted to open the discussion up based on recent internal discussions on this matter to make sure that we're, serving the community as we want to and as we intend to, with as much, available use of land and areas in town and certain zoning districts that, again, will allow for some of that specialty type of services that might not fit this contractor shop definition. I'm fairly confident that we can find a home for those things as they come to light. It's just whether they would be in a contractor shop facility. I think that's where we become obligated to administer this definition as it's written, and maybe tell the food service guy, hey, that's not an applicable use per this definition in this facility that you're in. But here's where you can go. And, those are the discussions that we would be faced with as staff, which we're A-OK administering that way. And just wanted to check this off with the board, see if you guys had any further ideas or see a need as a community to amend this a little bit and maybe think of some other ways of managing those situations.
And I guess to add to what Todd had said, as far as recourse, if they did disagree with any decision, but if something does come up that genuinely doesn't fit into a definition for any use that we have today, and that we want to look at potentially creating a new definition for and determination of where it fits within the existing zoning districts, I think that would be appropriate to come back, if we have a specific use case to review.
Right.
So do we want to make the recommendation to remove that and incidental retail sales?
I'm fine.
I could speak to that briefly too, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Go ahead.
You know, we threw that around internally as well with staff, and I can envision some contractors having incidental retail sales. Let's say you have a flooring installer, and this is his warehouse where he's storing his flooring, and he's got remnants left over from projects, and he wants to get rid of those on a retail basis to some other customers. That might not be an issue based on this definition. There's a few examples like that that could come into play that I think maybe is why that incidental retail sales is in there. Just throwing out ideas. We can work around that, I think, if it's kept in there. But if the board feels it's kind of pushing the limits a little too broad for what we want for this definition, we can certainly look at striking that out as well.
I mean, I think I'm fine either way. I mean, I think those incidental sales would be fine as, you know, being ancillary to one of these other functions, whether or not it explicitly stated it in the definition. However, I also believe that the incidental aspect of that does imply that it has to be incidental to one of the previously defined, you know, construction, repair work, fabrication, and assembly. So it's a secondary use to the primary conditional use, right?
Right. Just as long as the contractor wasn't turning into a, like, their home, like where their displays are.
Right.
And then like selling things out of there and opening up the door and.
So I guess that's to say, you know, I'm fine either way if the staff is okay with enforcing it as written. I see merit in both directions, I guess.
Sounds good. All right, and then the other discussion item I have is kind of similar where it can go many different ways. So this is about shipping containers as storage units. So if you guys are familiar along Highway 20 there's those white shipping containers, and they're just becoming more popular, people using them for storage. So the thing about them is they can sit either on a foundation or just on the ground. They could be used as an accessory structure, although they don't really have a use because they can't be an accessory structure in the residential zone because they don't have residential siding. And in the commercial zone, they don't fit the use of like they don't fit the definition of a storage unit because it's not all under one structure, I think is what we reference for that. So basically what we're asking for here, and we discussed this internally too, and we kind of landed on that maybe we should just make a definition for these so we know how to use them. We would define them as portable storage units and then could put them in the zones where we thought it was applicable. And if it was either by permitted use or conditional use. And Heath, if you want to.
Would this be forever or just temporary?
If it was permitted or if it got the conditional use or whatnot, it could be perpetual or temporary. We were thinking, you know, right now people use them temporarily when they're moving, where yes. I think in the definition we would like to say, you know, if that these types, I mean, we'd have to tweak that to say that there was like a limit of where they could be in a residential district, just so then somebody wasn't moving or did move and had one and then ended up staying in the backyard unpermitted, and then it doesn't fit the nature of a residential zone. But they are convenient for people to use for moving, so we want, or remodeling, so we want to still allow that, where if somebody would see that in a neighborhood that they wouldn't call and complain, but that we would either by permitting or just that it wasn't there for more than 60 days. If it became over that, then I'm sure we would get a complaint. But Heath, if you want to expand on that at all.
Yeah, you cut out there, Brandy. Were you referring to me?
Yeah, I just was asking if you wanted to expand on that at all.
Thank you
Yep.
for that intro. You pretty well summed it up, Brandy. I would only add, you know, I think we as staff could draft something. Really where this comes from is we have these storage pods or shipping containers, whatever you want to call them. There's some current uses throughout town that we're all aware of, but what we don't have in our zoning ordinance is a good, clean way that we allow them to be used. So back to what Brandy is saying, if we could define these things and place them into the applicable zoning districts that you as a board and we as a community wouldn't mind seeing them being able to be used in, that would really help us out as a staff level, so that when somebody comes with a request for one of these, we at least have a name and a place for it in the zoning ordinance. And I think that'd be easy enough to do. We would just want the board's input on where you would envision seeing these. Staff's recommendation would be maybe in some of the C zones as maybe as conditional uses, maybe as permitted. And then of course, in some of the I zones, maybe as permitted, maybe as conditional. The other factor we'd have to plug into the equation is where we would deem them allowable as the primary structure versus an accessory structure. Those are kind of the components we're trying to wade through. We could just brainstorm some thoughts with the commission, and we could definitely take a stab at bringing something forward to you in the future here.
Yeah, I think that sounds appropriate, and, you know, definitely looking at whether it could be permitted use in like an I zone, quite a bit different than what you'd want in a residential zone, and having some sort of temporary guidelines for residential use. You know, certainly there are some good uses for these things in the residential capacity. Yeah, I think it's definitely appropriate.
I think the difficult part is when we permit them, are they primary or are they accessory? Because, you know, one property might already have a primary business where they want to use it as their storage or like their shed, you know, and then another business or another property might be vacant and then they want to use it as, say they're selling trailers and they want that to be their office, or, you know, that there's no other buildings on the site, then what do we consider it?
Yeah, you know, people are actually building homes out of these things now too.
Yeah, they're pretty trendy.
And that's where I think
That's where you go with
So I think you
siding
wanna-
and stuff, right?
Yep.
And that's where I think you'd want to make sure that definition is clear on the intent of the use. If it is, if it is defined as a portable storage unit, to me, just off the cuff, that wouldn't constitute an office use because it's a portable storage unit. So you'd want the definition to be clear on the intent of the use of this type of a structure or accessory structure, and that way it's not confusing, and we got people using them for things that they weren't intended to be used for.
True.
Yeah. To me, if you're going to have, it's a subordinate use to a principal use, unless you're going to actually have a storage unit yard, and then you can meld that into a, what we conventionally think of as common storage. But we have that along Highway 20 right now. That's being used as basically a storage yard for people to rent them in a commercial district. But if you're talking about a storage unit as being something, supplemental or ancillary to another commercial use, I think it is. It's a subordinate accessory use. If you're going to have a bunch of them lined up together and rent them out, then that's maybe more of a storage yard as opposed to individual storage unit. And as far as them being located in a residential zone, I think it's a time, place, and manner kind of thing that you have to think about when you're putting that section together.
Yep.
Yeah, and we right now we have like a dumpster permit where, that's typically happens when they have a building permit and are either in a lot of, that's when they have to place it in the public right away when there's not room. Same thing could go for these, that we could actually just permit them. And then say, the max is 60 days of what it can be in that neighborhood, and at least have an idea if they're going to be used temporarily. Now, if they're going to be used for like the primary structure on a lot, I know that they are storage, so that's usually accessory, But what happens if there are no other buildings there? How do
An
we,
example, a real life example that we'll use here that just came up and what started this discussion is we have a current commercial use, I'll call it, and that business owner owns property across the street from them, and they need additional storage for their business. So they're wanting to install a couple of these on the property they own across the street from where their primary business is. So that lot across the street is barren right now. There's not another primary structure on there. These would become the only structures on that vacant lot. So you can look at it from a lot ownership standpoint. The business has its primary structure located on one property, but across the street is a separate property. It's an accessory use to the function of what they're doing, but it's a primary use of that land across the street. It's a unique example, but that's where if these were somehow written in to be approved conditionally as the primary use on a lot, or something like that, I think we find ways to make ends meet in a situation like this that we have in front of us right now.
I think if you're talking about something where it's not adjacent to the existing lot, it's across the street, I think the neighbors have an opportunity to weigh in on those types of situations. I think if it's an extra storage unit on the building where his business is right now, that's completely accessory, and if we want to make that work. But if it's a commercial district where other people have businesses and buildings, and all of a sudden you plop 2 or 3 of these things next door to them, it might have a detrimental impact upon their business and what it looks like too. And so if we're thinking about doing something in that situation, I would think that the neighbors should have the ability to weigh on that, not just as being invited to a conditional use permit, but I think at least there has to be some sort of evidence that they've been talked to about it.
I would think that wouldn't be materially different than what we've got with the Highway 20 storage units as a primary use, right? Whether it's a row of a dozen or it's 2 or 3, it's still primary use structures on the lot.
and then if they would end up doing say they would build a primary structure, then that could turn to accessory potentially.
Yeah.
Did he have to come in and get a conditional use permit to put those in along Highway 20?
No, it was, actually, it went to the Board of Adjustment for conditional use for storage units, a building, a very long, if some of you may remember that. I was there. Okay, and it was approved for that, I believe, but he never built them. And then it was determined at a staff level that if he decided he wanted these cubes, storage cubes, and that no board approval was required. It was seen as more of a parking lot situation, as in selling used cars. That's the only notes we have on it.
Thank you, Joe.
That hole needs to be buttoned.
Yeah, and that's why now with this example, that's what we looked into. And even just saying that it falls under storage unit isn't accurate. So that's why we're here with asking you guys kind of for an input on.
Yeah, and so I think there is a difference between, the accessory use and the principal use. And the principal use, coming through a conditional use process and having, a public notice and being able to provide some input, I think is appropriate for that.
Brandy, currently then, when we talk about these pods, for lack of a better term, in the residential, there is no permitting or length of time. I mean, and I don't have a big issue with your 60 days. I guess one of my things is, so if there was like a fire damage and it was storage and it got to be a 3-month process, would they I think there's got to be a way to regulate that in the residential, whether it would be you're good for 60 days and then you have to come back and reapply, or
Yeah, and I
because
don't.
otherwise, again, it just it seems like we've been down this road with other issues that it starts off innocently enough as 60 days, and 3 years later we can't get rid of the thing.
I think that it could be a per 60 day, if we said it expires after 60 days, and then per situation, if they're, if they're actively working on a remodel or something where it just took longer, but keeping an eye on it where it's like, if they'd come back in and you'd give them an extension, then it probably wouldn't be for an additional 60 days. But it would be monitored then to like make sure that they were, getting the project done, what they said was happening in a timely manner.
It might be.
But I can see it for certain types of uses like new construction, but if I'm having somebody come in to redo 3 bedrooms in the house or redo the basement, and I got to move all the furniture out, there are plenty of storage units in this city that I can take my furniture there. And so I'm not necessarily certain that you need to have a big container taking up 2 parking spaces in front of somebody's house or in their garage, when it's just something, those services are allowed and provided for in this community as well.
But some
So
people
I
have,
think it's a delicate balancing act.
but some people have their living stuff in there, and they're going back and forth during the remodel time, and I think going for a permit for 3 months and then needing an extension would be the way to go.
What's the time frame regulation on the dumpster permit that we have today?
I think 3 months is too long. I mean, that's your entire summer to look at that.
It
Yeah.
does seem like it would be similar to that.
I would think they would be similar to the dumpster permit. These are big metal storage units essentially with an open top, right? So if we already have a regulation and a process in place for roll-off dumpsters, I would treat them the same.
And another thing that might help you regulate that, Brandy, is if there were some way to stick a label right on the pod that when they come to get that it's posted on street side that this
Has a permit.
expiration date is such and such, so it'd be something that you would hand print out every time, and they have to display that on the pod. That way the neighbor can count the days. How long do I have to look at this? We don't have to police it, or, City Hall doesn't have to police that. The neighbors will police that, because if it's, I think 60 days is ample a time. Otherwise, like Todd is saying, I've run into it where people are, moving or waiting to move, and so they get a pod and they slowly start packing, and they know that to pick it up, there's a fee. It's kind of like the moving of a house, it's just as much to pick it up and move it as it is to, raise it. So there's a fee, I know, associated with that. Every time they pick that up and move it to another site, they charge X amount of dollars. So it would just be a way to, if they know that they're going to move it anyway to storage, it's just the big label on there would just make it easy. Everybody can see it when it's got to be gone.
And the 60
a good
days would
idea.
just be 2 months at least.
I
But
was just randomly.
I just think you go much more, and you go 90 days. I mean, that's a long time to have to look at something like that in your neighborhood, and half the time it's going to be in front of the sidewalk because they're long. They block the sidewalk, even the long dumpsters. If you don't have, I've done it myself. I've had the big dumpster delivered, and luckily I've always had either the back alley to put it in, and they have to run it along both sides of the garage to do it, when I've remodeled rentals. So they're long when you get the big ones.
yeah, and that's where, so if we would have it's been happening, so like people have been using them, and we haven't gotten any complaints, I don't think, but I'd have to confirm with Brent. But it could, so it's a matter of, is it an issue, or if we have the permit, then we can look at that and where it's being placed and for how long. But do we have to fix that problem if maybe it isn't one currently?
So can I speak to that quick, Brandy?
Yeah.
So kind of dealing with 2 separate subjects here. One, the on-site, more long-term use of these things in the C and I zones. And then a lot more temporary use in the residential zones. To Brandy's point, when we talked about the residential uses internally, we do have a lot of ordinances in place already that kind of self-regulate that process right now. We don't, to my knowledge, issue any permits for these things to get dropped off in somebody's driveway. We would issue a permit if it's in the right of way and it's on the curbside, for example, because we require the storage of any materials or a storage unit like this to be temporarily placed in the right of way we do issue permits for those things already, just like a dumpster that was referenced. These storage pods, I'm pretty sure we've issued the same similar right-of-way permit for those as well. So I guess where I'm going with that is I think a lot of the rest of it, aside from what's in the right-of-way, well, I should say including what's in the right-of-way, is already regulated the way it is right now. The stuff in the driveways or in the backyards and things like that, I think becomes self-regulated with the breadth of ordinances we already have in place. You know, to use city attorney's terminology, you know, these could be deemed as junk or unsightly or a nuisance that we could cite people for if they're there long enough and we start to get complaints on them. We do have ordinances in place that already address that concern. I guess I wanted to point that out because I'd be a little bit hesitant to start permitting for something that really hasn't been a problem and implement a new permitting process for these temporary residential use of these things and just kind of let that self-regulate itself as it has been over the years and hasn't really become a problem to our knowledge and, you know, see where that goes. But then on the flip side, go ahead and address the commercial and industrial, more long-term temporary uses of these things and get some kind of a definition in the ordinance for that type of use in the applicable zoning districts we would want them in.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So do you guys think that, you know, in the maybe like the C2, C3, I1 and I2 zones, that it would just all be, we'd come up with a definition and they would all be conditional use? Or do you see any of the zones where it could just be a permitted use where they would just have to get they'd have to get a permit still from building services, but?
I mean, I don't know, I districts, I don't know that it needs to be conditional use. I think it could be permitted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they have outside storage anyway, and, you know, I agree.
Part of that, Brandy, too, I think goes back to, I think it was Commissioner Kays mentioned, you know, whether it's a primary or accessory structure on that lot, maybe all primary uses of this nature are conditional.
Yeah.
Maybe, that is just an idea. Maybe all accessory uses except in the C zone, all accessory uses except in the I zone are conditional. I's are permitted accessory uses. I don't know, there's a lot of different ways we could slice that, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's appropriate, and that gets back to that, you know, the example of having the, you know, the dozen of them lined up as a principal use for, you know, a storage unit type structure, right? You need to be able to address that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Does it give you enough direction on where we want to go?
Yeah.
Any other comments?
So.
Cool.
Thank you, guys. That was helpful.
Any other new business or old business?
Nope, none that I have.
No need for executive session.
Nope.
Take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Stein. Second by Rhonda. We'll take a roll call vote.
Hanson.
Yes.
Dolly.
Yes.
Stein. Oletzky.
Yes.
Dargits Johnson.
Yes.
Kays.
Yes.
Ford.